Hey everyone, Chris here with another filler video. And yes, what you're looking at is real, as I decided to take a look back at an old Sonic fan game built with the Doom engine that's been in the works for a very long time now, just to see how far along it's come since I originally played it back in the 2000s. That game being Sonic Robo Blast 2. Okay, there's a lot to unpack there, so let's start with the obvious. How does this even exist? So, as I'm sure most of you are aware by this point, fan games are nothing out of the ordinary. Sometimes budding young game developers want to experience more of their favorite franchises, and figure a good way to do so is to dip their toes into creating something which revolves around said franchise. The only problem is that even if you're making all new material to avoid infringing on copyrights, you're still infringing on trademarks, thus making fan games is not quite legal. But the thing about copyrights and trademarks and the way they're supposed to be handled, at least before the DMCA started infecting the net, is that companies are supposed to police their own things and decide for themselves if something or someone is in violation of their rights and should be taken to task. Because of this, there do exist major game developers like Sega and Capcom who are, for the most part, okay with the existence of fan projects, provided those projects don't have any profit motives behind them, and so long as they don't interfere with any other official projects that are in the works. Whereas some companies like Nintendo are on the polar opposite end of the spectrum and throw litigation threats towards any fan projects to get even an iota of recognition. And that's how this decades-long fan project exists all these years later, because Sega's been okay with it existing, given that it's 100% free and contains no ripped content, at least as far as I'm aware. Now, I know the art and music are all original, and naturally all of the level designs are, given that this game uses the Doom engine, which no official Sonic game does. However, I'm not 100% certain on the sound effects. Oh yeah, and that's the next thing, which is probably confusing, is how the heck is this using the Doom engine? Like, isn't the Doom engine kinda not capable of sector-over-sector effects and slanted surfaces, not to mention the absolutely massive size of these levels? Well, okay, so it's not actually the original Doom engine, rather it's made using an offshoot of the Doom engine called Doom Legacy, which is an advanced source port which added a whole bunch of quality of life improvements, along with allowing the use of Boom extensions, where Boom was a very old source port of the Doom engine made in the late 90s, which was designed to exceed Doom's original limitations, thus allowing for many of the seemingly impossible effects that you see in these levels here. But then there's that whole thing with the title. I mean, this is called Sonic Robo Blast 2, not 1, 2. So it kinda begs the question, what the heck happened to Sonic Robo Blast 1? Well... yeah, this is Sonic Robo Blast 1. Sonic Robo Blast 2. Sonic Robo Blast 1. Robo Blast 2, Robo Blast 1. To call this a night and day difference would be a colossal understatement. Like, the first Sonic Robo Blast was pretty much entirely made by one person, Johnny Wallbank, who also goes by the moniker Sonicu. It was done using a very old game engine called the Games Factory, which was the successor to the better-known click-and-play game engine, and was released in 1998. Now, after releasing this game, however, Sonicu decided to form his own little dev team known as Sonic Team Jr. and immediately began work on a sequel. Now, I first became aware of Sonic Robo Blast 2 a long time ago in the late 2000s. Back then, the game had a very different feel compared to how it feels now. For instance, the original level designs were quite a bit smaller and all the music was MIDI based, whereas now there's freaking amazing digital renditions of the original MIDI music, and the levels are much, much larger, with more various scenery objects strewn about as well. Not to mention there's just more levels and zones in general. The graphics are all exceptionally well done too, and many of the sprites have proper 8-directional renditions going on, as you'd expect in a Doom engine game, and virtually all of the artwork is hand-drawn. The original art was like this too, but a bit more rough. It wasn't bad by any stretch, just not as polished as it is now. Again, this is all owing to just how much time and effort has gone into this thing over the years. But then, how do you actually play this? I mean, it's a Sonic game in the Doom engine. How does that even work? Well, the game actually features a tutorial section to get you started, but it works as you might expect. In the standard mode of gameplay, you view your character from a third-person camera and can tilt and move the camera however you want with the mouse, while using the AWSD keys to run around. Left shift is your default spin key, and spacebar is your jump key. Well, the reason you don't use the mouse buttons is because when you're playing a versus match against other players, you shoot rings at your opponents using your first mouse button. Or if you're using a gamepad, an automatic camera is present to assist with that so that you can focus more so on your movement. And yeah, even though the main gameplay I'm showing now is third person, there is a first person camera as well. It's just pretty much useless outside of multiplayer. Now, I don't have any footage of the multiplayer, but one of the main multiplayer modes is a versus match, which has you attempting to shoot rings at your opponents to defeat them, along with various power-ups which can give you alternate ring-based weapons or shields or such. Though there's cooperative multiplayer for the main story as well, and some other multiplayer modes too. When you start a new game, you first have to decide who you're going to play as, and this choice here makes a huge difference towards how you're going to approach the gameplay. Now, if all you want to do is race through the levels, then you'll probably want to pick Sonic or Knuckles. Now, Sonic runs the fastest and has a special speed thock ability when airborne, which is kinda like the homing attack that Sonic would get in later 3D games, but without the homing. Now, Sonic's the toughest character to play as, but the fastest by far when you do it right. Now, Knuckles has his glide and climbing skills from the original games, while still having a good bit of speed as well. Plus, he can bash through breakable walls with zero effort, making him a good choice if you want to do some exploration, but still want to go fast for the most part. Tails, on the other hand, is all about exploration, as he's pretty slow by comparison, but can swim and fly. And given the kinds of levels we have here in this game, being airborne makes it way easier to find many of the secrets. But seriously, you can burn so much time in these levels and still not find everything. There's also at least one unlockable character too, as I somehow managed to unlock Amy as a playable character pretty quickly after playing for only a couple hours. Now, Amy doesn't have a spin move, so she's very vulnerable in the air, nor does she run very fast, but she can slam her hammer down to take out enemies in front of her, and can do a hammer spin while airborne to much the same effect. Oh yeah, and if you needed more proof that this game's using some flavor of the Doom engine, check this out. When I fly up high with Tails in this part of the level, you can see the bending of the level layout goes behind this infinite sky, something typically only achieved in engines which use 2D sector-based geometry, like the Doom engine. Although I guess I should address something pertinent about this game, which may not be obvious just looking at it here. This thing's hard. Like, really hard. Sure, it has the same dynamics as your typical Sonic game, whereby, so long as you have at least one ring, you can only be instantly killed by being squished or falling down a bottomless pit. Otherwise, you simply lose your rings and get a brief moment of invulnerability, during which you can pick up the rings you lost. But this thing's still hard despite that because of the whole 3D thing. Like, jumping on enemies and landing on platforms in the first place is a precision skill when you have the capacity to move exceptionally fast, to the point where it's often recommended to new players that instead of jumping on enemies, you should just roll into them instead. Now, you can indeed spin dash if you press the roll button from a standstill, so oftentimes it really is better to just do that instead of trying to jump on something. In fact, this kinda leads into why I don't think we'll ever see a game like this from Sega themselves. At least, never again. Some of you might be familiar with an old isometric 3D Sonic game called Sonic 3D Blast, also known as Sonic 3D Flicky's Island. And while the game itself is decent, much of the difficulty in it stems from how tricky it is to precisely jump on things in a 3D environment when you're moving fast. And it's no easier here in this game. Combine that with the sheer amount of camera movement you do to keep yourself oriented, and this really does feel like a game which could only exist in a world where fan games are permissible. I guess we should be thankful by this point that Nintendo isn't the company who came up with Sonic. Now, as mentioned earlier, the game does technically have a tutorial to help you get accustomed to all of this, except, I guess this was one of the things I lost when I scaled back a version, as this tutorial level isn't even remotely finished, yet I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be. Yeah, I'm actually intentionally running the game one version behind where it's presently at, in order to be able to use a mod which allows the game to run at any frame rate I want with interpolated movement. Normally, the gameplay is locked at 35 frames per second, the same as the original Doom engine. And while that was all fine and good back on a 120Hz CRT, it's very hard on the eyes and difficult to control on a modern 60Hz LCD panel. And as of my making this video, the mod which unlocks the frame rate doesn't yet have binaries available for the latest version, so I had to scale back one. I'll have instructions in the video description on how to do the same if you want to get the uncapped frame rate going in your own copy of the game, keeping in mind this might limit your multiplayer options. Actually, speaking of unlocks, this game's freaking loaded with things to unlock. One of the first things of note which I unlocked was actually a bonus level, where everything was iced over and it included its own unique enemies and obstacles. In fact, I'm pretty sure there's a bunch of one-off levels included as bonus content in here, which you unlock either through completing specific tasks or from collecting emblems. And yes, there is a way to track your emblem progress to see exactly which emblems you've collected from every stage in the game which has any. This leads into something which kinda came as a bit of a surprise, seeing as I'd last played this over a decade ago. When I was first playing this game, the bonus stages for collecting the Chaos Emeralds were simply ring challenges, get a certain number of rings before time ran out. At least, I'm pretty sure that's what it was like. My memory's a bit fuzzy on the old version of the game, but take a look what happens now when you enter a special stage. Yeah, the game just turned into freaking nights into dreams. Now the funny thing is, back when I first played this game, there was a special Nights-inspired level you could play, with the proper mechanics and everything. But it was an unlockable and not part of the main game. Whereas now, there's multiple night stages and they represent the special stages for collecting the Chaos Emeralds, which you gain access to between levels by finding special stage coins. Now most levels have at least one special stage coin to find, but it's very possible to find more than one in some places, allowing you to tackle multiple special stages between each proper level. Now I know it seems like I've already shown like all the features or something, at least briefly to some extent, but there's far more things locked behind emblems and long-running goals and such, and it's probably a better idea that I not spoil too much on that front. To put it simply, there's almost as much content in here outside of the main campaign as there is in the main campaign, so there's no shortage of things to do. The Sonic Robo Blast 2 is essentially one of the biggest love letters to the Sonic franchise, or heck, just to gaming in general. Thus, it's absolutely worth your time to check out if you have any interest at all in anything related to Sonic the Hedgehog. Just be aware that the difficulty is pretty high up there. Not insurmountable, just high. Anywho, that'll be all for today's filler. Next up, 2 Saturdays from now on October 15th, we'll be doing a standard Ancient DOS Games review, episode 305, where we're going to be taking a look at a game which may have gotten its start in DOS, but rapidly ascended into a gaming juggernaut, which is still going strong today, for better or worse. So make sure to stay tuned to see what modern franchise had such humble beginnings. Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to all the people seen here supporting me on Patreon. If you'd like to join in with them and support the show directly, head on over to patreon.com/KASICK.